Russian military planes continue to land in Iran, one after the other. If the war starts, Russia will be with Iran. Iran is expected to attack Israel in order to avenge Ismail Haniyeh, the head of Hamas who was killed in Tehran. The U.S. is now sending a carrier strike group, warships in a fighter squadron to the Middle East, bracing for a potential escalation, a further one of hostilities, as Iran vows retaliation over the killing of a senior Hamas leader. In Tehran, it blames Israel for the attack. Israel has not commented. Growing tensions between Israel and Hezbollah and Iran are also prompting a new warning on Lebanon, the U.S. Embassy in Beirut as warning Americans who want to get out of the country to book any ticket available. After Israel's week of assassinations, airlines begin canceling flights in and out of the country. On the contrary, Russian military planes continue to land in Iran, one after the other amid war fear. If the war starts, Russia will be with Iran against Israel and the USA in order to avenge Ismail Haniyeh, the head of Hamas who was killed in Tehran. The U.S. president has vowed to help Israel counter Iran's looming attack but warned the Israeli prime minister not to count on U.S. support if he escalates further, and keeps Washington in the dark, which they blame for the killing of Haniyeh and Hezbollah commander Fuad Shaq. Iran and its allies are preparing coordinated actions intended to deter Israel while avoiding full-scale war. Russia intends to deploy offensive missiles within striking distance of Western Europe if the United States fulfills its promise to deploy a similar capability in Germany. In 2026, Russian President Vladimir Putin said, during celebrations to mark Russian Navy Day, to deploy the weapons which can carry nuclear warheads, taking into account to the actions of the United States, its satellites in Europe and other regions of the world. Putin added that American plans to deploy medium-range missiles in Germany pose a threat to Russia. The flight time to targets on our territory for such missiles, which in the future could be equipped with nuclear warheads, will be about 10 minutes. Episodic deployment of conventional missiles in Germany. In 2026, the statement said that these long-range conventional fires will include the M6 Tomahawk and hypersonic weapons under development that have significantly greater range than current land-based fires in Europe. Nikolai Sakov, a senior fellow at the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation Studies, who studies Russian missiles and arms control, said it was unclear exactly what missiles Moscow would try to use or deploy. He added that the land-based caliber was an obvious choice, stressing that it would be easy to develop and test before 2026. In addition, increasing the range of the Iskander or reviving the suspended Rubez project could be on the agenda. Publication emphasizes that Iskander missiles are already deployed in Kaliningrad and Belarus, while longer-range systems could be located deep inside Russian territory, which would increase the early warning time on both sides. There is also a cruise missile the Russian military has used two of these systems, Bal and Bastion, to strike land targets in Ukraine. With the Onyx M missiles, the Bastion unit based in Kaliningrad could hypothetically strike all of Poland. In addition to its anti-ship mission, experts think that Iran plans retaliate for the series of assassinations in Beirut and in Tehran, that this time it's not going to be like in April, where was a very orchestrated telegraph strike by Iran 12 days after that Israeli strike on the diplomatic complex in Damascus. This time, it's widely believed that not only will Iran strike, but all of its allies in the region, Hezbollah of course. We've heard the Secretary General of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, say that's what they're going to do, but also the Houthis in Yemen and various pro-Iranian militias in Syria and Iraq. So the stage is set for perhaps a very dangerous period, not just in Lebanon but across the Middle East. Is incredibly impressive, but it can be overwhelmed through saturation tactics. 1 to 9. 0 hours 5 minutes and 20 seconds, 233, 0 hours 5 minutes and 23 seconds, 566. It's an extraordinarily dangerous moment in that regard, and Iran arguably has a greater incentive to respond strongly time because of the degree to which they were embarrassed, frankly, by the Israeli attack in their capital against a senior Hamas leader, warned Israel or tried to pressure Israel not to be too aggressive in some of these strikes it's been carrying out prior. The U.S. certainly does have influence. The question is whether the administration is prepared to exercise all of it. The Israeli response in April was provocative, striking a facility outside of Qom, near the Fordow enrichment plant, but it was relatively targeted. And that was probably a result of U.S. pressure to constrain to circumscribe the response in this instance, though. It's not clear that any Israeli response, even if it is limited, will be unmet by an Iranian counter-response. So the United States, the administration, will have to exert even more pressure to try to rein in the Israelis from responding. But it will depend on the circumstances, it will depend on the damage. And if this doesn't go as well as it did in April, it's gonna be much harder to exercise that restraint. If one of those missiles gets through and lands in an Israeli city, kills civilians, you can imagine the circumstances in the expected Israeli response. I wonder there are even some Israelis who question Netanyahu's intentions and his interests, and Benny Gantz himself said he's putting his political interest above the national interest. Does Netanyahu want a broader war? It's unclear if he wants a broader war. What is clear is that his risk tolerance for an expanded war is much higher than we had previously anticipated, and that creates the risk of an anticipated escalation. If he does want a regional war, and you can make the argument, as Israelis have, that he has an incentive for one, that makes it all the more explosive. It's going to be difficult for that reason because his preferences, his interest, may not perfectly align with either the United States or the Israeli people, which is a terrible combination. Comey's, as the U.S. says it's stepping up America's military presence in the Middle East, deploying additional warships and fighter jets. As regional tension grows, the Department of Defense says it aims to strengthen protection for U.S. troops in the region and Israel in response to growing threats from Iran. And Iranian-backed fighters, Iran and its allies, have promised imminent retaliation against Israel. An announcer on Iran state TV said on Friday night that in the coming hours, the world would witness extraordinary scenes. And very important developments of the announcement came after a funeral ceremony in Qatar for the Hamas political leader. Ismail Haniyeh was killed in Iran on Wednesday. Hamas and Iran about revenge for the strike that targeted Mr. Haniyeh. Although Iran and its allies have blamed Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has not claimed responsibility for his death, but as I say right now, tension is high. The world is watching the Middle East and hoping for the crisis can be averted. The Middle East is shattered country, the attack, and the same time, the year Iran and its alliance proxy. They want to finish this job and stop the war and Gaza. Hezbollah said, stop the war in Gaza and we'll stop the attacking Israel. That's the main thing, and I don't see that the war in Gaza will stop or ceasefire breach because without knowing exactly what's the day after in Gaza. Israel is committing a genocide, and Gaza people set up the whole world so it would be difficult, and I think this is. If it stayed like this will be an endless war and forever war. On the top of that, tension in Ukrainian front is getting hotter. Ukraine promises powerful strikes on Russia, but Russia continues advancing. International tension is extremely high due to the conflicts in Ukraine and Palestine, and the involvement of numerous actors and superpowers. Amid this crisis, the U.S. stock market is grappling with recession fears, leading to massive sell-offs and a loss of $2.9 trillion on August 2nd, marking the worst day since the COVID-19 crash. The U.S. presidential election is approaching, and this crisis poses a significant threat to Biden's administration, particularly to Kamala Harris, the upcoming presidential nominee. Who will emerge victorious in this situation? How will the economy evolve? What is going to happen in Ukraine and the Middle East? Follow our channel to discover more.